is the industry leader in both service and unique events in the TCG arena. Whether it's running the largest community-run tournaments for Flesh and Blood or providing service with a generosity that is unique to the Realm games, you can count on the Realm for an unforgettable experience. Check out their website at realmgamingnetwork.com for details about their $50,000 Flesh and Blood tournament circuit happening all across North America. But check out everything else going on at the Realm, including tournaments for all kinds of other experiences. And just for you, ISP listeners, use the code INSTANT5, that's INSTANT 5, to get 5% off your checkout when you're buying from the Realm. Welcome, friends. It's another edition of the Instant Speed Podcast, episode 124, brought to you, as always, by the Realm Gaming Network. You can go to therealmgamingnetwork.com, use the code INSTANT5. Get all the cool stuff. This week, it's been a long time coming, but I've got one of the original pillars, the long-standing OGs of content and personality within Flesh and Blood. It is the Dice Commando himself, one Andrew Heintz. Andrew, how are you, friend?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me. It's exciting to finally be here.
It has been a long time coming, that I've already said. I do want to get to some quick business before we dive into all things Andrew. We had a giveaway announced at the end of last episode, $10 of store credit. This time, the winner is, I asked, what are your thoughts on Enigma, the new hero coming out? And AJ Weber commented and says, I think Enigma will be exactly what everyone is expecting. She's going to be an Iris of Reality and Aura's deck, filling the second part of the OG Prism design space in the Aura control version of the class. I think that that's pretty apropos. I'm pretty sure that that's a fairly reasonable, down-to-earth premonition of what Enigma is going to be. But AJ, get in touch with me via Discord, Twitter, however, and I'll hook you up with that code for $10 of store credit. New giveaway every week, so stay tuned. All right, let's get into this, my friend, because you have essentially been here since the get-go. You're one of the OGs. I don't know how else to properly kind of explain to people the kind of how intimately woven into the fabric of content space here for Flesh and Blood that you really are in there. You've been in the weeds for a while. So maybe can you talk to us a little bit about some of that TCG origin, where you're coming from, and how that angled you towards Flesh and Blood?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been playing card games since, middle school, which for me was many, many moons ago. Back in like the Ice Age days, is kind of to put that in context for folks from the Magic side.
Are we that far apart? I'm really curious, because I'm a couple shades below 40, and I think you and I are probably around in the same sort of stratosphere.
Yeah, I'm a couple shades above 40.
Okay, well, we're in the same wheelhouse. Okay.
Yeah, so so that was around that time. I actually played a game back then called Doom Trooper, and I played a lot of the, as you're well aware of, then there was a TCG boon in like the late 90s, and they were not all, to say good is even not accurate, but there was a lot of them. So I played several of those, and then I stepped away from games for about 8 years while I was in school. And then I came back and I landed on Star Wars Destiny, as it looked like a great game to play with someone who had never played games like TCGs, but not games, but had never played like TCGs, card games before. And that's when I started the content creation thing, because I started doing gameplay. And then I ran into Flesh and Blood and saw Dorinthia and reached out to LSS, and here we are. And I think episode 500 will go live next week. So it's been a
journey. I would say, I mean, here I am. This is episode 124. I've been fairly dedicated to getting this out every week, come hell or high water, with a few weeks of sort of solace around the holidays, kind of recharge the batteries. 500 episodes, 500 pieces of content. I think that a lot of people might not realize is that what people consume versus the time and effort put into this kind of stuff, it is a ratio that might terrify some out there. when I say that I put in about 60 hours of work into content every week to publish 3.5 videos maybe across different games, that like there's maybe 4 to 5 hours of content versus the like 50 to 60 that comes through. Can you talk maybe a little bit towards that reality? Because I'm always for people exploring their creative side and getting into the space. I just find that, you know, at the core of it, at the nucleus, if there isn't this furnace of passion, you kind of can get burnt out. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how much of your time and effort is put into this sort of this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, as a general rule, I assume that every minute of content is roughly 3 minutes of actual work, either in front of the camera or editing. You know, I do all of my own editing, which sometimes is probably very apparent, which is fair. But so yeah, it's roughly a 3-to-1 is kind of my general estimate. But that doesn't count, like, you know, when I'm out running and I'm thinking about, hey, what's the topic we're going to do? Or you know, when we went to Queenstown, I spent the vast majority of that flight writing in my binder, and then I came home and typed up scripts, and I've got backup content for a long time. So it's, I don't know if that you can actually quantify the amount of time, but you know, when you see Flake and I talking right now, this will translate to roughly 3 to 4x for him on the back end, what he needs to do. So.
Yeah, that's assuming that everything goes smoothly, which oftentimes it's not the case. But again, like, thank you for just putting that kind of stuff out there, and the community is better for it, for, you know, for people like yourself who are there just constantly putting out quality and insightful, you know, commentary, content, things like that. I want to ask you a little bit about one of your passions within the game of Flesh and Blood, which is Blitz. You've been very strong voice to support the format, and you're a commoner expert. And I want to ask you a little bit about Blitz, because it seems to be a lightning rod for whenever something bad happens. It's never within the spotlight when it's going well and people are having fun. But as soon as somebody sort of has a couple bad dice rolls in a Rhinar matchup, let's say, and it's suddenly the worst format there is. So let's talk currently right now. What is the current state of the Blitz format?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, you know, if we want to talk tier lists, you're looking at the top. Victor's actually very good. You have Briar up there, Emperor's up there, and then there's just this whole major swath of heroes right underneath, because, as you mentioned, it's Blitz. They can pop right in. If you're talking health of Blitz, I think we're right on the cusp of it becoming very, very, very good again. You know, a lot of the complaints, as you mentioned, is Rhinar blowouts. That's a very real thing. It can happen. You know, I don't think it happens as much as folks imply that it does, in terms of making the format bad or whatever you want to say. And, you know, where you really look, I think Briar's probably a little too good within the format, but once we get to skirmish season, she'll be gone within a week, almost certainly. So I think we're right on the cusp of getting into a very almost, you know, sometimes you hear complaints about the meta being too wide. And I think that's where we'll be come week 2 of skirmish season, is anybody's game. So
the complaints about a meta being too wide is kind of like a situation of like, oh, you poor summer child. Like, I've been there when it was only Starvos and Prisms or such, you know, like it's fascinating. I'm wondering where you stand on that, like wide meta versus relatively narrow meta.
So interesting question, because I actually think that's to a certain extent where we're at right now in CC. And stick with me on this, right? I think part of the reason that we have when you have a wide meta, I think a lot of times your bad matchups become very polarizing, right? Because you can know, okay, I'm going to lose into Prism. I just won't play this deck for this competitive season, for example, right? But when you have, you know, maybe it's 6 to 7 viable heroes in CC right now, right? You have great matchups for 6 of them, and then you have one really, really, really bad matchup. And I think the fact that everyone within that wide meta has maybe one kind of quote unquote auto lose, mm-hmm. I think is actually leading to kind of on the back end, maybe some of the sensitivity that we're seeing in the community right now to to certain things. That's just how I kind of feel about it. And maybe that's the reason that we have seen feedback in the past about concern about the meta being quote unquote too wide.
Sure. And a lot of the criticism is not necessarily meta oriented when it comes to Blitz. A lot of that is just, what I alluded to earlier is the fact that a lot of players will just sort of, boil it down to a variance game where the life totals are so low. The decks are relatively thin enough that's, if someone catches heat and you don't, like it's over early. Is there, how much weight does that argument carry right now that Blitz is, maybe it doesn't have the same kind of foundation to stand on as a competitive format because of that variance factor that some people might argue?
Yeah. I mean, well, when you say a competitive format, I know what you mean is CC. I mean, Blitz, I still think is a very competitive format. I think there's an argument to LSS bringing it to the forefront again as a competitive format. I do think that, I play a lot of games of Blitz, and a lot of them go to, 4 or 5 turns, or maybe even 6 turns. And I think there's this perception out there that Blitz is this like 1-turn game. And sure, there are Reinhardt 24 dominate blowouts, or you run up against KO and he nails the 6, and all of a sudden you're looking at a 24 Savage Feast or whatever it might be, right? But I don't think that's the norm. I think that's just the thing that folks focus on and talk about. So, I don't know what percentage of those games is going to be. Someone can probably do the math on Reinhardt and tell me how often that's going to be. Fair enough. But I think the vast majority of the games within Blitz are fine. And I think they're also, it's not going to be an hour-long game. It's not designed to be an hour-long game like Classic Constructed is. So I really think that there's a lot more, the community tends to focus on the negatives. And I think that's part of the narrative there.
And not only that, it's just like I feel that people forget about the same kind of situations that might arise when you're in that CC environment, because like I've been there where I was playing against a Starvo and I just got cripplinged into Oakened into cripplinged into Oakened into Oakened into Spinal, and like I never saw a turn. Like it's just that took a couple extra turns to blow me out because I had extra life total. The experience was the same. It's just, I get it. It sucks when sometimes there's non-games, but I feel like where you're mentioning that Blitz can be on the cusp of maybe getting a little bit more spotlight on it to elevate it to the same kind of status that CC is being treated. But I feel like there's the opposite happening. There's a lot of discussion and acknowledgement from LSS that, Blitz is a format, but it's now sort of been, getting ushered out a little bit. It might just be sort of saying, okay, well, like go have a seat, it's limited time right now. And, you can go play in the sandbox kind of thing. Do you feel like Blitz is perhaps not being just ignored outright, but it's getting neglected enough that because it's a situation of like, oh, we're a limited people now kind of thing, or we've always been a CC people. Is Blitz just sort of getting the short end here?
I honestly feel a little bit yes. I do know that there were some tactical issues in terms of just scheduling, right? In terms of adding another ProQuest season and trying to find a spot to fit a skirmish season. I know that that's part of it. So I don't think LSS is like, what, we're going to tactically start to dial back, Blitz. I don't know that was the case, but we do know that LSS uses their gym data and other observable data to make decisions for the future. And I am concerned that with 2024 being very de-Blitz focused, when they go and they look at the number of games played during 2024 or whatever it may be from a competitive gem standpoint, I do wonder at the end of 2024 if they're going to be like, oh, I guess nobody wants to play Blitz anymore, right? And I think that's going to not necessarily be data that tells the true story, because I feel, when my buddies and I go to the bar or the coffee shop and we play Blitz 99% of the time. And I feel that a lot of the kitchen table play that the vast majority of the non-competitive community are playing, I feel there's a lot of Blitz in there. So I want to make sure, my hope is that at the end of the year, Blitz is still continued to be supported, at least in the same way that it is now at a minimum, even if the data has started to swing on that.
So with this, the desire, I suppose, to have Blitz a little bit more recognized and obviously played, what can be changed with it? Is it a perfect format currently, but just maybe not getting the right kind of sunlight, or is it does it still have its blemishes, a few sort of things? Because it has seen an evolution in the past, as recently as this year. It has gone through some significant changes in the past calendar year of, sideboards and this and that, etc. So clearly LSS knows that it had its issues, it had certain things, but how much more amending to the format should there be in order for people to maybe come around to it?
I mean, just to be honest, Flake, I think probably none in terms of like format changes itself, right? I mean, what'll be interesting over to people, I think folks need to understand that Blitz and Commoner are different formats. You look at Blitz and mathematically the 20 health carries an impact in terms of how much time you have to respond. Armor also carries essentially double weight. If you can sit down with a full Guardian package, well, that's a significant shift in a 20 health, whereas it wouldn't carry as much weight in 40. So I think folks just need to approach it differently if you can't necessarily sit down and have the same experience as you would from a CC game. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
I tend to agree. I feel like a lot of the issues sometimes are just people having a bad experience early and not looking back at how the format has evolved, even from a perspective of new heroes that come in or rotate out, or new cards, and how that changes the meta game itself. But if what you're saying is where we're going, which is a much more open and vastly diverse meta within Blitz, I think that it's cool. Like I don't hate the format. When I play, I prefer to play CC. It's a matter of opportunity for me. If I can, I'll play what I prefer. But I've played Blitz. I've played in Blitz tournaments. I've excelled in certain Blitz tournaments. I've also gotten blown up in various Blitz tournaments. But at the same time, I think that there has to be a certain situation where, like, I get it. I feel like the punishment factor of losing in a Blitz tournament or getting outclassed in a Blitz tournament just hits different than in CC, because in CC you have a couple turns to just realize that you're outclassed and maybe you can change things. In Blitz, if you're outclassed, like I've sat down in a Blitz game that I felt confident in, and the person across from me was just on another plane of existence where as soon as I realized what was going on, I was just a passenger watching my own like life flash before my eyes. I was like, oh my God, like it was surreal. It was existential to that degree. And I feel like maybe some people have had that experience way back when, and the fear of dipping their toe back into that maelstrom is just something you might want to avoid. I encourage people like you do, Andrew, is let's just try it again, because I think it's good. I think it's actually a pretty rad format. It's not limited. I love limited, but that's just me. Why can't we enjoy everything, man? Why can't we enjoy everything?
Well, I'm not going to pretend to answer. I'm an old man shaking fists at clouds. So I'm not going to pretend to answer that one.
Would you put it back in Worlds? Would you put Blitz back in Worlds?
I would. I know that tomatoes are being thrown at screens right now. I get it, but I believe that again, I believe it's a very attractive format for folks learning, maybe not learning, but coming to the game. Right. I mean, just on the level, in terms of the cost difference between Blitz and CC, it's actually negligible in terms of the overall. I mean, in most cases, it's negligible. It's not necessarily about the money thing, but it does make it more approachable. Someone's, I only have to track down 2 copies or whatever. Plus, we need to think, if you're trying to onboard a new LGS, Flesh and Blood's not the only game in the world. And we might not be able to get that prime Sunday spot, that prime Saturday spot to be able to run a 4 to 5 hour CC tournament. You might be a Tuesday night where the shop closes at 10 and the tournament starts at 7. And that's Blitz. You don't even have enough time to draft in that, right? So in terms of onboarding not only new players, but new stores, new venues, new communities, Blitz is a fantastic vehicle for that. And if those people can see that at Worlds, I think that's a boon. I don't think it's a negative to bring that and help. We've seen they use Worlds to showcase their products, which is phenomenal. And I think that they should do that.
So I'm going to ask you here, because when the announcement kind of came out regarding Blitz being, excommunicated out of the Tier 4 tournament circuit, there was a comment made or written up, and I think it was also James who said this was, Blitz was being removed more so for allowing the competitors to sort of not have 3 formats to focus on and split their attention on, but more so, it was more so that, other than, well, nobody likes it. I'm curious, like, I've worked in communications spin, corporate spin rooms before. I know when things sound fishy, and to me, I just feel like this was more of like a, okay, what's a good excuse or what's a good reason that we can give to sort of, like, I'm not saying that it's not true. It's definitely true. But I feel like when I heard that from James, in my mind, I was like, I know you can't outright say that people aren't happy playing Blitz at these major events. And, like, I feel like it's a flowery way. Do you kind of get the same vibe?
Yeah, I mean, my vibe is that it was a bit of a capitulation to the feedback they were getting from their competitive players, which is completely fair, right? It's completely fair. I also think, when we went into Worlds 2022, the one in San Jose, they had banned Stormstriders for that event, and it came back right after. And to me, the spin on that was very clearly that they didn't want folks on stream to see KO blowout turn 1 or turn 0s. And there's logic in that, right? You don't want to, especially if what they're trying to sell their game as is being this skill-based, intensive back and forth, you don't want to have a blowout on camera, because everyone's like, oh, it's just the same as, insert other game here. So I understand if they think the risk is too much there, and if they think it's going to be damaging to their brand, then fair enough. I don't think that that's the case anymore. I think that's in a better spot, but it only takes one hero to be released to put it back there, I suppose.
Yeah.
So
that's the danger. It all just kind of resides on the fact, like, this is true about any card game that's out there. It takes one printed card or hero to put everything askew. Everything just sort of balances on this razor's edge, but they do a good job. I truly believe. Another format in which has started to actually, I've never really paid much attention to Commoner. That's merely from the fact that I wasn't necessarily aware of the culture behind it. It has a lot of fans. It has a lot of community and culture behind it. Where does Commoner fit within the landscape of other formats? I mean, if CC is king, where does Commoner sit in that tier list?
I think Commoner is third, but CC, you can figure out how far my hands need to go apart for Blitz, right? But CC, Blitz, and then Commoner, I think, is right behind it. I think, again, we were talking about being different formats. What folks need to understand about Commoner is it's a value format. You don't really have your quote unquote combos or your setups in Commoner to the same extent that you would in CC, because you don't have the big cards. So folks are like, oh, Commoner's boring. Well, to you may be, right? And that's fair feedback, but it's not trying to be budget CC. It's its own different format.
And it's one that I've come to realize that a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into. I was talking to Kasharn from LSS, one of the gentlemen who writes the blogs and stuff like that. Really awesome dude, but he is an assassin at Commoner. He is somebody who's like, until I lose a tournament, I'll change a card around in the deck, and he's just basically been playing the same deck for however long. But this guy just collects gold foils at whatever Commoner tournaments he goes to, and just listening to him talk about the deck and the format. And I asked him, I said, hey, just in a couple sentences, can you just tell me what I should watch out for, because I was planning on playing in a Commoner event. And he writes this giant, like 10 paragraphs of what the meta is, what I should look out for, how this plays. And it really blew my mind, because I was definitely expecting something along the lines of, well, there's Ira, which with a lot of go-agains, you have to fatigue them, or there's this, in which you have to be aggressive. I thought that was what I was going to get. It was a lot deeper than that. Can you talk to us a little bit about perhaps the depth of Commoner, and you know, when everybody's eyes are on how, you know, a top 8 in Flesh and Blood could be 8 different heroes, where does Commoner fit into this?
Yeah, I'd say Commoner in terms of the actual meta is probably very similar in terms of the top heroes. The thing folks need to remember is that Commoner is the most evergreen format that we have in Flesh and Blood, right? You have, so I would say there's like Ira, Bravo, Olympia, Decimator is actually, I would consider top tier right now. And then did I leave? Oh, Icelander, I left out, right? Icelander is also very good in the format. So they're probably the top 4, but beneath them is just this huge swath of, you know, again, if you can come in, you have experience, you have a good value deck. Commoner's a very deck building focused deck as well. I think it's very wide open in terms of players being able to bring back their favorite heroes and play them maybe in a slightly different, but fundamentally solid level.
I find though that there's the stigma that exists around it. You call it, you know, Commoner, and the first thing you think of, it's like Pauper and Magic and however else others will call it. But it just seems like, oh, it's much like akin to Shapeshifter Draft. It's like or Chaos Drafting or something, whatever you want to call it. But like it just has this aura surrounding it of it like, don't take it seriously. And in reality, it's a hyper competitive, very skill intensive format that goes beyond just sitting at the table. It goes, like you said, into the deck building process, the strategy surrounding it, etc. But it still doesn't shake a little bit of that stigma, of that it's a gimmick format type stigma. Is that something that you feel is holding it back? Do you think that it's something that it could shed, or how can it potentially shed that stigma?
Yeah, I think it comes back to, so the answer is no. I don't know that it can shake that stigma, because I think it's going to be hard for folks to not view it as a budget format as opposed to its own format. I just don't know that we can make that sale because it's called Commoner. It sounds cheap, right? Pauper, it sounds not cheap, but it sounds budget. So therefore, folks, I think, are naturally going to view it as an onboarding format, which it is. But it doesn't have to be, right? Like, to your point, Kashar, and I actually played him in Queenstown in the final, right? He bumped me out of... he took me out in the final. That was a very high level game, in my opinion. So I think you can still have Flesh and Blood play in these games, but you can also just have an 8-year-old show up and run a deck. Not that they're not doing that in CC also, but you get my point.
It's true, but it's at the same time, yeah, like, it's, you know, everybody talks about, like you said, there's a million card games that are out there, and for those who are really entrenched into TCG culture and it's their life, like it is for me, for you, for so many others who might be listening to this, it gets expensive, you know. So for those, I mean, probably not listening to this perhaps, but for those who might be very entrenched in Magic or other card games that are out there, Star Wars Unlimited, whatever, and want to maybe dip their toe into it, it could be a little bit intimidating. Nobody wants to get into a new game when the price tag to play a competitive deck is like $500, let's say. Mm-hmm. But to get into something like Commoner, to even just get a flavor of not just the rules, but I think that what Commoner has really proven to me is that there is a very thick competitive you know, air around it. That it's not something that you can just waltz through and have a good time. There are hunters out there that are looking to collect trophies, as it were, and you yourself are one of them. You're very successful in it. So is Cash. Cash is exceptionally, you know, successful in it as well. There is, in the same vein that when people are drafting players and saying at a pro tour, saying, I got this guy to win, I got this girl to win, I got this person to win, I got them, there should be the same kind of respect thrown on it as it should be for limited players, as there should be for Blitz players. I'm wondering if this is just merely a matter of real estate when it comes to what LSS can put on display, because you can have a calling that's going to get all the attention, but even if the battle hardened next to it is Commoner, it might get a little bit of a buzz, but it's not going to get the same amount of spotlight. And I think that perhaps maybe that's what it is. Is there a fix there? Is it a matter of just commoners just fighting for a limited amount of space?
I mean, maybe I would actually, and this is just my personal opinion, but I actually don't want to see a commoner battle hardened, right? I think that the format that they have right now, where commoner is side events, and the biggest event, the commoner Olympics right now is the gold foil events at these major events, and I think that's okay, right? I think it's okay to have it not everything has to be, a tier X event. Because I also, again, Commoner is a great onboarding vehicle. Again, it's evergreen. To your point on the Magic players, they can buy a Commoner deck, and that deck, sans bans, will be legal forever. So folks can step away from the game and come back and not have to worry about updating their decks. Like, oh yeah, sure, I'll go play this. And I think that if you put it in a competitive format, we'll all of a sudden see 40 IRAs at the top tables or 40 Icelanders at the top tables. And then the community is going to be asking for change, intervention, updates. And then I think you take that piece, the aforementioned evergreenness, I think you take that piece away. So I think using it as an onboarding vehicle, and not just onboarding of you can get this deck and come play the game, but onboarding of, hey, let's show up to the side events that are calling. Let's show up and do this. And all of a sudden, these people are not just playing the game, but they're part of the community. And then where do they go from there? And I think that's Commoner's role, and I think it's a very powerful thing.
It has a great presence, and I just find that it's kind of like finding a movie that, you've heard one or two people talk about, but when you finally sit down to watch it, you're just like, oh man, like what have I been missing? It's something similar to that. And I just like, everybody has their own flavor of what they enjoy. I just find that there are certain gems to be unearthed or have been unearthed that you just got to go walk over and take a look at them. Living Legend, though, I feel is what has sort of propelled itself to maybe take away from some of that spotlight. Living Legend is brilliant. I think it's a really cool thing to have, like this evergreen or this sort of legacy format that just includes everything. Now there is a band list that's developing for it ultimately, but what would you feel like if there's an event, okay, and all things considered, the prize money for all these events are the same. What are you signing up for? Is there any is it Commoner? Is it Blitz? If there's $10,000 on the line for everything, and what do you can only join one. What are you going up for?
I would likely join Blitz myself.
How come though? I'm really curious. I want to know. It all comes under the same rule formats of Flesh and Blood and how the games are played. I just wonder what appeals to certain people regarding the different formats. Like, what is it about Blitz that really calls to you?
I think it is the faster games, if I'm being honest, right? I mean, we were kind of talking about the bad matchup thing, right? So let's say like Prism Loop thing right now is a big discussion, right? If I'm going to get Prism Looped, I'd rather only get Prism Looped for an 8-minute game than right? I mean,
it's true. I mean, yeah. Like, do you want to get kicked in the balls for 3 minutes or 25 minutes? Yeah, I get you.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's, I really like Quicksilver Prodigy and that's not necessarily the why I would do Blitz, is because of that particular hero, right? But what Blitz has enabled them to do is bring a lot of different heroes to the game and playstyles to the game that wouldn't necessarily be as viable, or maybe would be too good, whatever it may be, within Classic Constructed. It doesn't have its place, right? But you look at, like Benji. Benji is a super cool hero. OG Kasai was superhero she was a superhero at the end too, right? But so many different things they can just put in there and kind of test the waters and try. And I think it makes some people a little more creative. And I very much like the format.
I completely agree. It's not my cup of tea. I very much agree. Just by nature, I'm a control player in most card games I play. I like to play the grind down game. Like, to me, it's just like, I might not be the smartest, but damn it, I can hold my pee the longest, like that, like that kind of thing. I got a question coming in from Playtime TCG regarding Commoner, asking if you could add or take away any one card from the Commoner format, what card would that be?
So there's one card right now that's very strong in IRA, and that is Surging Militia. So Surging Militia is a card that gets +1 for each card blocking it. In the format coming in on IRA's +2, it's very strong. I would probably look at that card, but I'm going to actually throw something crazy out there. I think that what they really need to do is make the Kodachi a Katsu spec, so that IRA cannot, and she wouldn't fundamentally have to change much. She would still have Edge of Autumn, so she could still do the stab. You know, she could do the 1/2 for 7, but she wouldn't have, you know, the Kodachi's in a fundamental value format like that is very strong, because you can come in for 1/2 with IRA for no permanent cards, right? And that's kind of one of the pillars of Flesh and Blood that was talked about forever, is this concept of permanence, right? Every decision matters. Pitching a blue 0 for Kodachi 1, Kodachi 2, that doesn't cost you anything, and that's very strong. So that's actually what I would do. I would make the Kodachis a spec, and that's actually not maybe a horrible idea to do in other formats, actually.
I actually think that there's a lot to be said there. The Kodachi value of IRA, that was the first sort of deck that I got into and I played in tournaments, was in Blitz, was with IRA, and I was just like, this is ridiculous. You know, like, just even about like playing something like Push the Point, you know, and it's just like a 1, and if I hit it as the second thing, like they let the Kodachi slide, like this thing's insane. Like, that's ridiculous. But either way, I agree with you there. If there was one Majestic perhaps that you would want to include, like if there was one Majestic, like let's say a generic Majestic that you would kind of put online to spice up the Commoner format, what would you kind of relegate to Commoner class?
Well, it wouldn't be a generic. It would actually be Raiden. Bolton is very, very, very bad in Commoner. He could use Raiden, I think. I don't think that would be format shaking to have Raiden become even a rare. They could derate it to a rare and it would be usable.
Okay. I feel you. I want to sort of shift gears a little bit here, talk more so about the community in general. And this has been discussed for a while now, and I think things are kind of at least on the upswing to a fairly observable degree. But community discourse is such that has had its ramifications, it's had its ups, its downs, etc. I think that we did go through this sort of spike of, you know, dare I say toxicity, but ultimately it's just a matter of sometimes opinions being presented in the most ridiculous ways. I want to ask you a little bit about the current climate of community discourse. What does it feel like right now out there?
If you're going on the Twitters, it's horrible. It's bad. Well, in my old man opinion, it's real bad on the Twitters. Let's
elaborate a little bit about that, because when we talk about bad, I mean, I get it. It's Twitter. Like, if I ever catch a stray Elon tweet, I feel like I feel stupider. But at the same time, if we're just going to sort of put this in the box of Flesh and Blood related tweets and content, what is it about the discourse currently that is maybe emitting this like sort of sour stench?
Yeah, so I think, let me try and say this diplomatically, right? People have a right to opinions, even if they're bad opinions. I feel that that's actually where the vast majority of the quote unquote toxic discourse is coming from right now. It's not that Flake had a bad call or bad take. It's not that Andrew had a bad take. It's that Andrew is the most horrible person in the world because he had this take. And I want to acknowledge that is not a TCG community unique thing, right? That is the world we live in. But gaming, to a certain extent, in my opinion, is supposed to be an escape from that. And we all are a community fighting for the same thing. So it's a bummer to me that sometimes we can't give other people within our community maybe a little bit of leeway in that they're not trying to ruin your game because they don't like the LS loop or they don't like the value of the KO deck. That doesn't mean that you can't go buy the KO deck. I think everyone just takes things too personally. And, a Flake, if you say something I disagree with, I'm not going to think you're a horrible person. I'm going to be like, oh, that's, I wonder where that's coming from. The only way times I get very upset at people is when they are dismissive to people or mean to people and don't try to see what they're saying. And I think that's another big problem on the Twitters, obviously, is because you only get, 210 or how many ever characters you get? I don't even know. People have to summarize and they can't necessarily say their full thoughts, and then people can pick out what they want. But I don't know. Again, that's my old man shaking fist at cloud thing, but it'd be nice if we could give each other the benefit of the doubt once in a while.
I wholeheartedly agree in terms of where things go that can become a little bit overblown. And you're right, because like, don't attack my argument, not me, and that
right.
kind of is where a lot of this gets lost in the fray, is that I no longer am listening to, or I'm no longer sort of addressing the fact of, hey, you think this take is bad and I think your take is bad. But as soon as you're no longer like, what's your problem now? Is it like, because we've lost sight of what the argument or the debate was, and now you're saying that I'm a doofus with glasses. It's like, that has nothing to do with Arclight Sentinel, kind of thing like that. But I get it, because I'm privy to it. You're probably privy to it. Anybody who's in the content space has definitely had some anonymous notes slid under the door now and then that you wake up to, and you're like, oh, I didn't know that I eat this. Like, like, who knew that who my mother is currently sleeping with? Amazing. I had no idea. Thought it was my dad. I had no idea. But that's kind of where we get to, and it's just annoying because, like, there is this approach to debate where it's no longer the argument that's the focal point. It's this adversarial headbutting of, I just need to beat you. I just need to prove that I'm better than you. And what's sad is that I have more respect often for those for the party that learns the most out of the because you may believe something, and even after the debate with somebody, if you still believe what you believe, at least you have reinforced that belief through some sort of tempering, and and that kind of, you put it into the forge of argument and it comes out stronger. Good, that's awesome, but do so in a nice, humanitarian way of talking something out. What I hate is just when, like, it's like Arclight, like, a lot of the debate is just whenever somebody poses an opinion, a lot of the replies will be, and I've seen it, is like, oh, this argument coming from a illusionist player, or this argument coming from a Kano player, like, are you serious? Well, approach it like that. Not everything is just placed in like these 2 or 3 neat little baskets where all arguments are like, well, they're an illusionist, so they're this type of player. I feel like we have to sort of just get out of that habit of just isolating what somebody's saying and just leaving their mothers out of it. You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense to me, but I'll send you a DM later telling you why you're wrong. So, no,
no, put it in public where everyone can agree and have these subcontracted fights within the thread. Look, a lot of the toxicity, and I'm not saying that this is everything. The problem is, and a lot of people has brought this to light, rightfully so, is that 90% of the volume is from 10% of the people, kind of thing. And that's fair. Or less, exactly. And it's just because everybody who is having a good time is out there having a good time. And it's the people who have these more aggressive bad takes or such that are seeking people to link up to. They're looking for other neurons to connect to out there in the Twitter sphere to appreciate or otherwise support whatever take there is. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just like, you're seeking some sort of fellowship within that bad take umbrella. But how much of this, you have to think, is just the fact that as the game grows, which it's doing, the player base is statistically growing. It's going into new markets, new places. The player base is growing. Therefore, there's going to be more voices, more conflicting opinions, and as such, more friction. I mean, it's going to sound odd, but at what point is this heated discourse just a symptom of a good thing, which is just growth of the game?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know at what point it is. As someone, again, since the beginning, I definitely saw a big shift around kind of the post-Monarch days in terms of community discourse. Now, with disclaimer, we were in the pandemic at that time, and that was folks' only primary outlet. So, take that with a grain of salt. But I definitely saw a shift around then, and I'm definitely seeing a shift in discourse recently. I think the more recent shift, I think, is a little more concerning because it's a lot of the enfranchised players who seem to be going at each other. Maybe more so. I don't know. Maybe I just wasn't on the Twitters as active before, which is actually true. So maybe it's through a lens, but it does seem that. I mean, I agree with you. This is inevitable. We are eventually going to be Magic the Gathering, right? And the communities will reflect that, and we probably already do to a certain extent, right?
Well, yeah, and I don't want to throw all of Magic's communities under the bus. That's not what
I'm talking the top. I'm talking the top 1%.
There is most certainly, and Flesh and Blood is leagues and leagues and eons away from having the same kind of impact and reach of Magic. However, the fact that we have grown to the degree where we are bringing in players from other games, new players are finding this game, etc. The game is growing, and there will be conflicting opinions, or perhaps opinions that are kind of adopted or translated over from other communities that they've been involved in. I have been very privy to some very toxic and awful discourse surrounding Magic the Gathering, and everybody has been. It's not far, you don't have to go far from Reddit to find some of the most disgusting cesspool opinions that are out there. Ultimately, though, that's what happens. Growth, bringing more people, is just increasing the odds that some people will not agree on things, and sometimes it's to the extremes where it comes to blows. It's the internet. No one's that brave, but it manifests itself in a caps lock ridden tweet or something along the lines where somebody's tagged or somebody's this or somebody's not that. What I find is just this is one of the things that I've been really conflicted about, because like you said, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and there are so many outlets and platforms for people to just sort of stand on a soapbox and pontificate about what they like and what they don't like. However, whatever happened to just, if you don't like something, you just don't like it? Why is it that everything that somebody doesn't like has to be turned into some manifesto or some sort of big diatribe that it's seen as you're some sort of martyr or you're some sort of hero for going against the common grain or the flow of things and saying, I don't like this, and here's why? I'm really curious as to how that sort of has become sort of the norm, where there is this uppity entitlement, sort of elitism of, if you don't, it's cool to not like something that people are enjoying. I just wondering where this came from, because it seems so interesting and so linked to this past decade of it's cool to publicly hate on stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I have the wrong degree and background to answer that question from a philosophical standpoint. And this is not gaming. Let's be very clear. This is the whole world.
Yeah.
Right. But we've definitely, in the last day, and I think you're right, it's about the last decade or so, we as a society have a Western culture, I should say, right? Let's not blame everybody in this one. But we as Western society definitely gain power, with air quotes, from other people making mistakes, whereas I don't feel that it was that way when we were growing up, right? I didn't become more popular or gain popularity by being like, oh, Flake used the wrong term. We all know he didn't mean that term, but that's the wrong term he used. And because I'm the one who outed it on him, I now have 20,000 views on my Facebook, or 20 million views on it. And that's the reality of the situation is, oh, I caught Flake on video saying the wrong thing at a Starbucks when he was too tired one morning. And now I got 40,000 views. So now I'm popular for the next 18 minutes. That's our culture.
It's become sort of a situation of where like success becomes this like last person standing situation, right? Where it's like, oh, we got another one. There's this much more space available for everyone else until someone turns on somebody else and whatever. It's like this whole thing of like, I'm going to get this person, or I'm like just waiting for people to fail and, making sure that people know what you don't like and why you don't like them. I find it just so self-serving and righteous to the degree that it's like, who cares? like who cares? And I've always wondered where the line is gonna be drawn for people thinking that their shit matters. And I'm not saying that from the perspective of like you as a person don't matter, but you know what? Like if you don't like the shoes somebody's wearing or like the pin that they have on while they're broadcasting or whatever, like, you know what? Like 500 words on Reddit is and there's better uses of your time. Like go read a book to a bird. Like I feel like it's better serving that way, you know, like I don't know what else to explain. I'm not, again, I want to be clear here. This isn't to say that people's opinion and what they like and don't like doesn't matter, but there is a degree to which it's like, oh yeah, like you can say that, like, I just don't like that pin that person's wearing. Okay, does it merit, you know, an intro paragraph, 3 supporting statements, and a conclusion? No, I don't think so. Like, you know, it's you keep your thesis for things that are important. But man, like, I got to take this back to how we started this, which was 90% of the noise, 10% of the volume, kind of, or, you know, like it's just, it doesn't equate. And sometimes it just bothers me that these people have these types of power, this type of influence, and that
perceived power.
It's perceived, right? Andrew, true. But like the problem is that I myself am so susceptible to it because I don't want to say I'm weak to that degree, but like I'm very prone to trying to reading criticism and whatever. And a lot of it, I try to pick out constructive aspects to improve upon, but a lot of it is just like, F that guy, his glasses are stupid. And it's like, okay. Like,
yeah. I mean, you know, bringing it back to the flesh and blood portion of the conversation instead of Andrew and Flake attack society, or I should say tackle society, right? Yeah. But you know, I do think that there is still a feeling, and this is not a bad thing. I do still think there's a feeling within the flesh and blood community that if I go on and I'm like, man, Briar is too strong. I don't like the ALS loop. I don't like losing to Kano. I do think that there's still a spark of hope in us, to use a Star Wars term, that maybe LSS will read that and realize that you're not happy and will do something about it. I do still think that exists. So maybe that's part of the fuel. And then maybe that's why people so vehemently go after other people about, you know, I really don't like playing against Kano. This should be, and sure, people always extreme bells. Like, Kano should be banned because, well, that wasn't really your argument. Your argument was, I don't like losing to Kano. I don't feel there's anything I could do, or whatever it may be, right? Kano, Prism, insert your, you know, you're watching this a month from now, insert here, or the month here, whatever. I do still think there's a spark of hope that someone's going to see that and do something. I don't think that's probably true anymore, because I think we collectively, I think you eloquently, or maybe not so eloquently, said this in, I think, 3 episodes ago. Brian and James aren't really on Twitter anymore because we ruined it, right? So I don't know that is there anymore, but
that's essentially at the end of the rainbow of everybody's little crusades. Is that it's not a pot of gold. It's nobody's there to high five you, you know,
right?
And you're very on point, wherein a lot of people are like, you need a place to evaluate, I guess, the vibe of how things are going. And social media is the place where you can kind of get a quick litmus test of what people are enjoying, what people are not, because it's a very accessible and it's a well-populated platform. And you like you said, you get like 220 characters to explain, like, how are you going to do that to explain to me why the Arclight Sentinel is, you know, the worst thing ever. Like, you don't have much time or space to do it, and not everyone has another platform where they can be a little bit more long format. But the issue then becomes how you approach that, because Brian just flat out said, like, you guys are awful. Like, not everybody, but you guys are awful. And aside from that, it wasn't because Brian doesn't like to be told when cards are not good, or cards aren't working, or cards are bad, or whatever. It's not because he's got this thin skin and has no intention to read some of this and take it to heart and try to pick out the, and brush off a little bit of the extremism off of it and then the stretching of reality and taking the fruit out of it. It's just the fact that the way that it's approached is not like, here's a well-structured argument as to why this isn't working. It's, you're stupid, you're bad, you're ruining the game, this sucks. Well, what do you get out of that? And then when you try to even dip your toe in to engage in that pool and try to maybe stir things up and get something out of it, it becomes a pylon session, and nobody wants to walk into that. Even James, the dude who creates the game, is regularly accessible to people, is tweeting, goes on podcasts when he can, etc. But even he now is like, I just work through like a press liaison kind of person, that is a massive blow to accessibility. Like, in any of the games that you've played, Andrew, have you ever had this type of access that we had, like a year ago?
No, the only time is when I was playtesting for games. That's the only time. But to your point,
yeah.
As of 6 months ago, someone could have gotten on and had a conversation with Brian Gottlieb, who is one of the most amazing people I've ever met. You could have had a conversation with him and potentially gotten in his ear. And we don't have that anymore because y'all couldn't be good. I don't know a better way to say this.
Well, yeah.
No. Yeah.
That's the thing. And we're going to give you the, we're not mad at you. We're disappointed.
There you go.
That was
it was going to happen. I don't think it was time to happen. It was eventually going to happen. We all admit that or acknowledge that. I just don't think it was time. And I think things just got out of control real quick. But
yeah, it kind of seemed like it just kind of happened overnight. And maybe it is a symptom of the explosive growth that perhaps the game saw, or going to Japan or whatever. Ultimately, it just comes down to the fact that you're right. It was inevitable. It's just the way of things. The circle of life is somebody gets tuned up into Twitter, becomes popular and accessible, and then some of the worse, the bad actors sort of kind of come in, that person just goes out, and then they become part of the grass, and then a new breed of creators come in and are like, oh, we're going to give it a shot. And then they also get just slaughtered by a pack of hyenas. But it happened too quickly. I think that's the issue, because we went from 1 week of Brian explaining certain changes to cards and design philosophy, answering people directly on Twitter, to, 2 days later, there's just this statement saying, can't do it, not worth it, see you later. And I don't blame him. That's the tough aspect of it. It's the world we live in, Andrew.
And, at Pro Tour, they, being Brian and James, they did a panel, right? So first off, they have a panel. Like, you get to sit down with Brian Gottlieb and James White and listen to them talk about game philosophy and stuff. And in the Q&A, they essentially got pretty aggressively attacked, right? And there's been discourse and apologies and stuff since, and completely fair. But do we not realize that they are now less likely to do that in the future, or will have changed the format such that there's less Q&A? Or, we're losing access to an amazing piece of, we are potentially losing access to amazing piece of this game, which is the fact that you can go shake James' hand at Pro Tour or an event. That's awesome. We really don't want to lose that, right? That's part of what makes this game, in my opinion.
I wonder how many of that, I wasn't there, unfortunately, and I wish I could have seen the Q&A and kind of get a little bit of a vibe when the questions are being asked, because sometimes you see it in people's eyes. I've moderated a lot of these things, and sometimes you'll see it when somebody's in line or they're approaching, they have that glimmer in their eye and they've got their phone out ready to record themselves trying to, have a gotcha moment, and just sort of, and it just seems so self-serving. It's like, what are you doing? Is this for views? Is it for clicks? And the issue there is that at these Q&As, there have been a lot of comments and questions that were delivered that were critical of the decisions made by the development team, but it wasn't done in a malicious way. It was done in a, we would like some insight on this, why this decision was made. But for those who go out there thinking that they're going to have like this cool screenshot, this cool thumbnail that they can have of like, I asked James like the craziest question, oh my God. Like, I feel like that is, it's more self-serving. It has nothing to do with game philosophy. It has to do with sort of personal vanity and saying I was the edgy one who asked the tough question. Yeah. No, the people, the tough.
Do you think it's that, or do you think it's that people just don't know how to frame their arguments anymore? Right?
I think
there's one of my favorite scenes, Saving Private Ryan. Right, they're walking across the field, and Tom Hanks turns to one of the soldiers. And he's like, "Now that's how you gripe, soldier." Right? I think we need a little bit more of that.
Well, okay, look, you're right, because properly articulating and structuring a question, I feel is. It's not something that's not a skill that everybody easily has. And, you know, it is what it is. It's like juggling. It's something that you could practice and do. But a lot of the time, some of the people that'll go up there, it's just, trust me, like if the concern was so important to them and they wanted to ask this question, they would have sometimes just they would have had time and intent to structure the question properly. When people know that there's a panel and they have a legitimate gripe about something, they'll be like, this is my opportunity to go and ask this question. It's not going to just randomly pop into their head like midway through the Q&A. It's like, oh, I forgot. This thing has bothered me my entire life. Let's go ask him. It's usually... at least from what I've witnessed, is that those who have asked very difficult questions or very critical questions have done so in a very well structured way, because it was something that bothered them for a while and they knew that the opportunity was there and they presented it because they were prepared. The people who want to, you know, who maybe try to catch that heat and want that, you know, that heel energy when they're going up to the podium, they do so in an abrupt and sort of abrasive way, because that was the intent all along. It wasn't to find resolution in the question. It wasn't to find solace in whatever the response was going to be. It was to get a rise. It was to poke at the bear and to catch that. And that's easily identifiable, because they usually have a shit-eating grin on their face when they're asking it, and their phone is out recording themselves. Like, that's oftentimes how this goes. It's not all the time, but like, it's so apparent. Like, it's, you know, no one's fooled to that degree.
Yeah, fair enough.
Oh, Andrew, we went a little we got a little heavy there towards the end. I love it.
Little sideways.
Why not?
So it goes. Well,
I sincerely do appreciate you coming on the show. It has been a long time coming. You know, you and I had a nice little chat there on your program, which was a great video post Queenstown, and you were busy working, man. Like, you were rubbing elbows, having a good time, but also you had set up some great recording sessions with a lot of cool people. You really brought the vibe, man, and it was really cool to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. It was great to be here. And yeah, you had been on my show maybe well over a year ago.
It had been a while. Point. I want people to know just how awesome Andrew is, because besides the, me being on his show, etc., afterwards he sent me a thank you card in the mail, and it really brightened my day, because he's like, "Oh, I just need your address," and I was like, here you go. Maybe you're in town, maybe you're coming over for a beer or something, I don't know. But then a couple weeks later, I get a thank you card in the mail with some very kind words. And I think that is something that people should know, that you're a good guy, you're a nice guy, you're a caring person, and you've done so much for the community that I don't know what else to say. Just keep chugging along, my friend.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear nice things. So I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that, so thank you.
No worries. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give another $10 of credit away this week. So why don't you, who's listening to this wonderful program called Instant Speed, in the comments of this video, why don't you tell me, for $10 of credit that I'm going to give away next week, why don't you tell me what the best take you've ever heard on Twitter is? What is the best, most cool take that you've ever heard somebody put out there, out into the ether. Tell me what that was. It could be one of your own even. Into the comments here, and I will reveal the winner next week on Instant Speed. I want to say thank you as well to our Patreon supporters, our Tier 3 Patreon supporters. Get a little bonus sauce because, Andrew, are you going to stick around for some Go Again action?
You betcha.
Perfect. So I'm gonna ask Andrew some questions like, hey, what card is totally being slept on in Commoner? How about this? Where should we see Worlds in 2025? All this plus, hey, what is your secret talent? Asking Andrew all the tough questions, so don't go too far. And that's it. That's all. Andrew, where can we find all of your goodness out there on this place called the internet?
On the Twitters, no, that's a joke. You can find all of my stuff on Dice Commando on YouTube. I believe it's at Dice Commando, but it's also, you can use your Googly skills on YouTube and hit me up. We have gameplay content, a couple videos a week, Commoner midweek. Good stuff. Hope you see you all over there.
Beautiful. All right, my friends, thank you very much for listening to the Instant Speed Podcast. We'll catch you next week. Don't forget, you are not losing if you're learning, so keep playing the game. You might win. It's important. All right, we'll see you next time on ISP.
Well, I work